In honor of Karnak being released today, here's some Khorne gameplay, courtesy of Monch on Discord. This one was actually sent in like a week or so ago, but yeah, it's got the new and fancy Bloodwrack Medusae facing off against the ever-haggard Skull Cannons. I say ever-haggard. Skull Cannons are actually pretty decent. Probably one of the few, well, one of the few range tools Khorne has, certainly, but one of the few kind of interesting pieces that can sort of do some of the dynamic things. Also, obviously, long-range shooting, flaming magic damage, good single target damage for the most part. Okay, explosion damage, not the best shooting at infantry, but does have Gore Feast to regenerate health in melee and also replenishes ammo in melee, which is a nice kind of tech feature if it can maintain a mobility advantage. Reasonably fast, pretty low melee defense. They now have the Steam Tank icon because they're kind of a similar War Machine type unit, right? Though they don't cause terror. They're, of course, demonic, which, I don't know, did these guys actually get leadership buffs alongside other demonic units? I don't think they did, thinking about it. But, yeah, they should be fine. We've also got some Blood Shrines here, more single entity, regenerating chariots, also have a little bit of a leadership and melee attack buff with that Totem of Endless Bloodletting there, and Valky up in the sky. Then we've got some Marauder Horsemen here. Looks like, yeah, just those ones up on the high ground, and then lots of infantry horsemen backed up by a couple of elite minotaurs with anti-large. And, of course, two Bloodwrack Medusae, and then some handbows. This Dark Elf player looking to do some skirmishing here. Dark Supreme Sorceress, and we've got some Dread Spears, Witch Elves for DPS. Pretty common these days. I have to admit, when Witch Elves lost their Enrage, I thought they were going to be fairly useless, but the DPS Witch Brew buff does actually make them fairly scary if it's used correctly. But let's see here. I like how Launch is going to be kind of leading with the Blood Shrines here. Basically, he's like baiting the damage from the Blood Racks into the Blood Shrines, also eating some of the damage on the Black Ark Corsairs there, where he can kind of shrug off a little bit of the damage with 110 armor. And a relatively small target size for a single entity. Plus, of course, can regenerate. And, yeah, the Blood Rack, certainly, with that Scatter Shot, new and improved, is going to be doing significantly less damage to the Blood Rack. Of course, can be regenerated. There's not a lot of elite infantry to shoot at here anyway, but these Marauders certainly could be threatened and dealt with pretty easily by the Blood Rack's shooting attack, potentially. But Valky also kind of skirmishing here, keeping the Blood Rack away from her line units, firing primarily at those single entities. Then she gets into combat here. The dragon also kind of swings up into the back line. It's going to drop a nice breath attack on that skull cannon. And then, let's see here, kind of keep her in the background as Valkia fights here in the front line. Dragon's going to pull back there. Decent amount of damage done to the skull cannon, but of course it can just charge straight into these Corsairs here, especially with the infantry support nearby, and just regenerate that HP. And both are going to need to regenerate ammo soon, but a very questionable dive by the Supreme Sorceress as those Minotaurs were charging in the front line. They're immediately going to do exactly what they should, which is just switch places. The cannon goes to regenerate HP, while the other cannon stays in place to keep the dragon pinned on the ground, and that's going to be a very bad engagement for that Dark Sorceress. Meanwhile, the rest of the Dark Elf forces trying to get into contact here. Witch Elves getting a little bit disrupted by the Blood Shrine, not really getting into the Marauders like they need to, although here they're able to, with some Skull Cannon trying to stave things off. But yeah, those ones are going to get eaten alive, absolutely. The Marauders also kind of getting caught up in this Supreme Sorceress engagement, get some work done, also get terrified away momentarily, but the Supreme Sorceress is slow enough on the ground. The Skull Cannon and the Marauder Horsemen should be able to keep up. And let's see, there's going to be some screening elements thrown in here. Witch Elves and the Blood Rack trying to spring the Supreme Sorceress loose. Let's see if they're able to do so. Supreme Sorceress is definitely routed here, taking quite a bit of anti-large damage. Pretty much everything does get caught up, except for the trusty Skull Cannon, which, I guess, once it's in its charge animation, is going to be fast enough to keep up with the Supreme Sorceress. As you'll see here, Murderous Prowess popping off, of course. That is going to affect all units, and especially for the Blood Racks, does increase their missile damage. It is definitely something, especially if they're trying to fire at single entities, but yeah, just in general, that nice melee attack spike. Witch Elves definitely putting in some really nice work right now. If the balance power is slightly in Khorne's favor, that's mostly due to this Supreme Sorceress situation, which is definitely turning into a situation as the Siren of Red Ruin attempts to catch the Skull Cannon as it chases Supreme Sorceress. Valky also swinging out there, so just queue up Benny Hill music as the pursuit engages. Blood Shrine also doing some pursuing of routing units. Maybe going to get a little bit isolated here and drag down, as this Skull Cannon also does, being kind of in the triangle of 3 Black Ark Corsairs, although they choose not to focus fire, evidently Micro being prioritized elsewhere, understandably. One Medusa is going to go down, though, just chopped to bits by Minotaurs. And they're going to use their armor-piercing damage, charge on through. Despite the fact they're anti-large, can still do plenty of damage to these sorry Black Ark Corsairs there. Witch Elves still trying their best to keep chopping it up. The Blood Shrine really hasn't faced enough, this one at least, hasn't faced enough damage to get dragged down. Let's check in. That other one managed to stay alive. Other Skull Cannon actually comes out, and Gore Feast, rather, is not quite enough to stave off demonic instability, but it definitely helps. Like, this Skull Cannon actually, in the rare case of a demonic unit, manages to recover its leadership after suffering from demonic instability, which is very impressive. And certainly the leadership buff from the Blood Shrine, as small as it is, probably comes into play there. And of course the Gore Feast as well, just to stave off the damage. But interesting, yeah, the Supreme Sorceress out in the distance gets real close to the white line, but the Khorne player very critically ceases the pursuit right at the last second, and the Supreme Sorceress is able to actually rally. So potentially critical error there. The Skull Cannon doesn't even notice initially as the... You know, I'm sure the Khorne players just kind of prioritizing the Micro over here. They're like, oh, she's getting chased off for sure. I'll bring him back. But no, just barely mistimes it. And the Skull Cannon could turn around and shoot the Supreme Sorceress there and probably see her off just fine once he notices. But still, perhaps she can get some Soul Stealers, try and regenerate some of that HP. We're going to see a nice spear swap near, cutting down some of the line troops. The Dark Elves, they attempt to pursue and bring down those Minotaurs. The extra armor certainly helps against these unarmor-piercing spears and, you know, Black Ark Corsairs and so forth. Certainly gives them an advantage over regular Beastmen Minotaurs. Hopefully we'll see Khorne Minotaurs get added to the Beastmen roster. It's a little bit odd now that they have, you know, Pestigores and Zangors, but for whatever reason, the Minotaurs of Khorne are just left to the side. All sad. But hopefully that gets changed in a future update. I think the Cockatrice also probably should be available for Beastmen, as much as I am loath to give them another flying monster. Well, that it would change it a ton for them. They already have a very good monster selection, but yeah, I might take it in certain builds and certain matchups. Flying single entity with barrier is definitely a big pain, but speaking of pain, Siren of the Red Ruin certainly feeling the pain here as she tries to stay alive. Ooh, nice tracking shot there. Glancing blow from the Skull Cannon, but still, some damage managed to be done. Yeah, the one Blood Shrine and the one Skull Cannon managing to stay alive. The rest, well, I guess one more Skull Cannon also still alive out there on the far side. So, yeah, that's just in terms of sustainability. Skull Cannons are somewhat vulnerable to a lot of things, but can definitely survive against just regular infantry. For the most part, just fine. And Skull Cannon, as said, has just been popping shots, using all its ammunition to shoot the Supreme Sorceress as she flies back. Definitely a good use of it. Another hit there is just about going to send her into routing right before she's able to actually get the Soul Stealer off. So, yeah, I might have just dropped that Soul Stealer and charged straight onto that Skull Cannon there as it was exposed, rather than trying to do too much else. But ends up being a victory there for Khorne. Nice to see. Minotaurs get some really nice work done, of course, value-wise, just cutting down the dragon, cutting down the Blood Rack Medusae, and the Skull Cannons also pretty much paying their value back as well, which is nice to see in terms of damage output, and also tanking quite a bit of damage. Blood Shrines also contribute nicely for the buffs, and again, tanking and dealing damage. Just in general, using them to kind of support an infantry line gives it a lot more punch, without having to necessarily invest in slow infantry like Chaos Warriors, who are going to be vulnerable to a bunch of things. Certainly, Blood Shrines are vulnerable to different things, but when you have this many, like, 1,000+ large units, right? If you look, there's, what, 6 large armored targets between the Minotaurs, the 2 Skull Cannons, 2 Blood Shrines, and, I mean, the sort of disruptive chariots, not necessarily best... well, the same tools aren't necessarily good against them as are against Minotaurs. Some are, right? Obviously just anti-large in general, but specifically chariots are sometimes a little bit too disruptive for infantry to fight effectively. These ones are generally pretty decent. They're not the best in the game, but they definitely can get the work done, and that's what they needed to in this one. They did exactly what they needed to. So definitely interesting builds on both sides. I like to see some nice stuff for Khorne. Yeah, Karnak was released, or not released, but announced. Who knows when he'll be released? Probably alongside the next big update for Total War Warhammer 3, but basically he's just going to be a good doggo mage hunter boy, silence aura, I think, and removing of magic attacks. I saw some people posting on Discord. I honestly didn't read the full announcement myself, but there it is. The trailer's there. It's pretty cool. Shows Shadow Wizard of the Empire being hunted by big Khorne doggo, but most of you have probably already seen it. But yeah, definitely hyped for that. Hyped for Khorne to get another interesting character. Hopefully he's not too expensive and is, you know, reasonable enough to be useful. Khorne definitely suffers from small armies sometimes, so hopefully he's not too insanely priced. But overall, definitely fun to see them get more stuff, and hopefully you enjoyed this. If you did, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification. Every time I upload a new video, you'll be notified. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.